Good evening everyone, and welcome to the June meeting of the YDOA. Seems a little odd to be saying good evening in the middle of this bright Saturday afternoon, and I'm recording this talk. Before we begin, I'll just say one or two things about the meetings that are coming along. In July, Max Elliott is very kindly organising a visit to see Denman organs. We'll let you know in due course whether that is going to happen, of course, because of the restrictions. In August, on August the 21st, Graham Smales, the organ builder from Market Wheaton, is kindly organising a tour for us of the organs in Market Wheaton. This sounds something that may well prove unadventurous, but in fact the organs in Market Wheaton are quite fascinating. The Methodist Church has a unique case. It's an organ which is very well worth going to see, and you will never have seen anything quite like it, so do make a note of that date, the 21st of August. The dinner is now going to be, we hope, on the 16th of September. This is to accommodate the speaker, Paul Hale, who is going to come and talk to us at that, we hope. And he's also going to give a presentation about some of the organs he's recently advised on. So again, make a note of that date, 16th of September. So, these are the sounds Bach heard. Well, in a way, perhaps that title gets you here under false pretences, since I don't really think there's a single organ builder in Germany, or anywhere else, could actually put their hand on their heart and say that this or that sound is identical to the sound that Bach would have heard in the early 18th century. 300-year-old antiques are indeed quite a rarity, as you all know, and 300-year-old sets of organ pipes, which have been on active service, as it were, for their entire lifetime, are even rarer. Combine that with a church building that has survived all that time unaltered at the same time, and you really are into an area that is extremely rarefied. When both of these things have survived together, it's almost as if by accident. The expertise of organ builders of Bach's day, of course, is not in doubt, and neither is the preservationist approach which we have experienced for the last 80 or 100 years. The difficulties, of course, as we know, arise during the 19th century when the organ and its preservation was enduring a period of perhaps what I might call the Dark Ages. For about 100 years after Bach's death, he was really only known to cognoscenti, people that remembered him, the pupils of pupils, and the publishers that took an interest, partly of course through his children. Emanuel Breitkopf was one, and the others were Hofmeister and Kühnel, two organists who teamed up around 1800 to publish Bach's complete music, which they never quite managed. Then, of course, there were later on the editions in the middle of the 19th century, the Peters edition of 1844, 1845, and later on the Bach Gesellschaft, the Bach Society edition, but that didn't appear until 1865. So really the notion of preserving a Bach organ was actually not there in the 19th century. It was only really into the 20th that it came about. Instead, of course, the 19th century was obsessed with adjusting things to concert pitch, to equal temperament, and to implementing the devices possible after the Industrial Revolution. There are two exceptions to this apparently depressing scenario. Two organs and buildings that have travelled through time unaffected by all that. Remarkably, the first is Bach's church in Arnstadt, the church where he was appointed in 1703 and where he stayed for 4 years. When one was younger, one was taught, possibly if one was taught anything about Bach at school, that he became organist of St. Boniface in Arnstadt. This is all very well, except the church burnt down about 20 years before Bach was born. When it was reconstructed, it was called the Neue Kirche, the new church, and that was its designation, and Bach was appointed there. Of course, more recently it's become known as the Bachkirche, or the Bach Church. The organ then was put in by a wonderful organ builder from Mühlhausen, which is close by Arnstadt, and his name is Johann Friedrich Wender. What survives of Wender's pipework is indeed quite remarkable and testify to somebody of extraordinary ability and craftsmanship. Indeed, apart from a couple of repairs about 20 years after it was put in, absolutely nothing was necessary until the mid-19th century got going. At that point, in 1865, they engaged an organ builder called Julius Hess of Leipzig to do a restoration. A lot of it had fallen to bits. Well, Hess just got hold of the bit which had fallen to pieces and threw it out. This mainly consisted of the reeds and probably the highest ranks of the mixtures, although we're not absolutely certain what he did get rid of Wender's 21 stops. Most of the damage, though, was done, unfortunately, in 1913, and another contract for its rebuild was awarded to Steinmeier, and Steinmeier was tasked with bringing the organ from the top gallery of 3 down to the middle gallery, where of course it was not nearly as effective in the church. So that's the first thing. Steinmeier found that he could only keep about 7 of Wender's original stops. He did have the nous to do that. So amidst all this romanticery, if I can coin the term, 7 Wender stops survived, and quite a number of pipes in other ranks which Steinmeier found were too good to throw away. So by the time of the historic restoration, which was carried out very well indeed by Otto Hoffmann, the historic organ restorer from North Germany, there were indeed about a third of Wender's pipes left. Otto told me that he thought there were about 27 or 28% of the original Wender pipes there. The rest he did a reproduction job on. So with the best will in the world, the mixtures of that organ, of any of these organs really, are not intact from bottom C to top C. Somewhere the reproduction stops. I guess it's probably somewhere about tenor G, but here is as close, I think, as we're going to ever get to hearing a plenum, a chorus mixture sound that Bach regularly experienced in one of his places of work. was the early prelude in C that Bach possibly wrote at Arnstadt when he was there. The stops that survived in Hoffmann's preservation are the wooden 8 and 4s from the positive and the main manual foundations, which include the absolutely magical viola da gamba. Indeed, Hoffmann believes that this is pretty well exactly as it was. He can detect absolutely nothing that's changed the voicing in the pipes he has inspected. So here is a recording of the Neumeister setting of the Passion Chorale, played by the organist of the Bachkirche in Arnstadt, Gottfried Preller. This will show you exactly why Bach wrote organ pieces. There was an increasing awareness of Bach's organ music from the time of the early 19th century. This occurred at the same time, more or less, that Mendelssohn restaged the Matthew Passion in Berlin in 1829. At about that time there was an organist called A.W. Bach, August Wilhelm Bach, no relation to Johann Sebastian, who began to play his music with considerable frequency. He was the organ teacher and later the director at the Berlin Royal Institute of Church Music, the Königliche Institut für Kirche Musik, and he collected more Bach manuscripts than almost anybody else and gave probably more performances than almost anybody else. The very first resulted from the publication in Vienna in 1812 of the Great Preludes and Fugues. The first publication there had been Bach's lifetime, just the St. Anne Prelude and Fugue as we know it, had been published, but apart from that nothing occurred until 1812. But the 6 Great Preludes and Fugues, A minor, B minor, a little C major, C minor, big C major and wedge, all came out in Vienna in 1812. And this enabled performance, which gradually took hold. And so by the end of the 19th century, and indeed the beginning of the 20th, Bach was revered and had gained his true status. The irony, of course, in this is that no sooner had this occurred than we have the Second World War, First World War, Second World War, and there was an isolation of East Germany behind Churchill's Iron Curtain. This actually was not entirely detrimental as far as the organs were concerned. There was a more or less permanent standoff, as you know, between the church and the atheist state during those years, resulting in the organs going into another kind of time capsule until the wall came down in 1991. It was then as though these organs had been mothballed with very long-lasting mothballs. But again, with great serendipity, this is exactly what happened at the Church of St. Wenceslas in Naumburg. This organ was the great instrument built by the Silvermann pupil, Zacharias Hildebrandt. And Bach didn't actually meet it until the end of his life. It wasn't an organ he worked with regularly, and he was called to do the inspection report on it in 1746. And as I say, remarkably, this organ survived. Bombs fell either side of the church during the Second World War, missed it, and then it went into a state of complete stasis until it was restored by Euler in the year 2000. So almost nothing happened to that organ during the 19th century. In fact, when Euler came to it, all he had to do was to restore it. He said to me, not Euler himself of course, because he died, but whoever it was from Euler said to me that so much of it had actually fallen to pieces by 1999, so that in fact a lot of it was actually sticking together. And in fact, a little more of this organ is original, therefore, than you might think, because how much is it, when it's something original, when it's not, and how much of it do you have to replace? Not quite sure. But indeed, it's said that about 80% of this organ is original. This doesn't again include most of the reeds, the top ranks of the mixtures, and the very highest stops, unfortunately. But here is the 8-foot principal sound, which must be virtually as Bach heard it. It's played by the Swiss scholar Jean-Claude Seinder here in the first piece from Bach's Art of Fugue, written almost at the same time. So we can be pretty well certain that that sound was exactly the one that Bach heard in 1746 when he reported on that organ, and at the same time he wrote the arrangements of the cantata movements known as the Schubler chorales, including, of course, the well-known Wacht auf. In the same category, I suppose, are the organs of Gottfried Silvermann, which Bach knew, which are quite a few. Most of these were in Dresden, including the organ of the Sophienkirche, St. Sophie's, where his son Wilhelm Friedemann played the organ from 1733. We know of several recitals Bach gave there, including two particularly well-reported ones from 1725. He also played in the Frauenkirche, in the Church of Our Lady, where he gave a 2-hour recital for the Russian ambassador in order to put him in a sweet frame of mind for the political negotiations which were then taking place. I wouldn't dream of suggesting we did the same thing for President Putin, or perhaps I should. Tragically, of course, all the organs in Dresden were destroyed in the war, every single one that Bach played. The one saving grace, perhaps, is that all the Silvermann organs in nearby Freiburg, that's the picturesque place which is about 30 kilometres to the southwest of Dresden, every single organ there by Silvermann actually survived. This includes the very beautiful one in the Jakobikirche, St. Jacob's, which we don't really hear very much of, and the one which is recorded a lot more, that in the Petrikirche, St. Peter's. There's a rather splendid recording by the former excellent organ scholar of the Minster, Richard McVeigh, playing this via the Hauptwerk system. It's one of their electronic wonders. The unfortunate thing about the Petrikirche is that the church building interior has actually been radically altered since Bach's time. They've put screens across the church, there's a big glass screen across the organ, and it really doesn't sound anything like it did, unfortunately. So here is the cathedral organ now in Freiburg. This was Silbermann's first major instrument from 1714. The 19th century only undertook repairs, and when they restored it in 1983, they said that it was putting it back to its original condition exactly. Well, it has to be more or less, I suppose. Here then is Christoph Albrecht, the German scholar, playing the notoriously difficult piece from the end of the Klavierübung, Jesus Christus, unser Heiland, Jesus Christ, our Saviour. And again, if these were the sounds that Bach heard, we can well understand why he wrote the music that he did. Unfortunately, there is no historic survival at all in Leipzig, where Bach worked from 1723 until the end of his life. About 20 years ago, the organ builder Gerhard Wöhl placed a replica organ in the Thomaskirche, in Bach's Thomaskirche, a replica of the organ in the Paulinerkirche, the university church, but some are dubious about the actual sounds that are heard from that. I have never actually played it. Absolutely nothing survives from Weimar either. This, of course, was where Bach wrote most of his organ music between 1708 and 1717, but sadly that chapel and the entire ducal palace burnt to the ground in 1774. There is one consolation in that a replica situation to Weimar exists at Weissenfels, where we know Bach played on 2 occasions. Indeed, he wrote the toccata in F, which goes right up to the high pedal top F for that organ. It was the only organ around where Bach was that actually went up that high. Some of the ducal palaces were in fact much of a muchness in Saxony at that time, and in Weissenfels we have a palace and a chapel which are architecturally very similar to the Weimar buildings. The chapel at Weissenfels survives. Unfortunately, the organ doesn't, but its case does, and complete details of the Christian Ferner organ there do. And in 1983, there was a reconstruction. So here is the freelance German organist Alexander Kuschel playing the fugue in B-flat by Georg Caspar Wecker, of whom you probably haven't heard. Indeed, I hadn't either, but he's in fact one of the teachers of Pachelbel. We haven't yet considered Bach's time in the north of Germany during his school days in Lüneburg and his visits to see Buxtehude in Lübeck in 1705. Also when he auditioned, of course, for the post of organist of the Jakobikirche, St. Jacob, in Hamburg in 1720. Contrary to erstwhile popular belief, we really do not know for certain that Bach ever played an organ by Arp Schnitger. The 1720 audition report from Hamburg certainly doesn't mention it, and instead it insinuates, or more or less says so, that he played the organ in the Katharinenkirche for his audition in St. Catherine's in Hamburg, where the organ was by a builder called Friedrich Stellwagen, Stellwagen. There is in fact a far greater weight of evidence that Bach played organs by Stellwagen than he played organs by Schnitger. His attendance at the Michaelisschule, St. Michael's School in Lüneburg, ended with his lodging with the organist of St. John's, Lüneburg, Georg Böhm. And Böhm's organ in Johanneskirche was also by Stellwagen. Last time, the root positive, very beautiful sound to the root positive, hadn't been installed by the time Bach was there. It wasn't installed until 1714 or something like that. But Bach also encountered organs by Stellwagen again when he went to see Buxtehude in 1705, not in Buxtehude's own church, which was the Marienkirche in Lübeck, because there the organ was contracted to Arp Schnitger, but in fact not built by him. in, but at the Jakobikirche, St Jacob's in Lübeck, where the organ was by Stellwagen. That organ is preserved, but in fact, of course, it dates from 1637, so I think the likelihood of all the pipes being exactly as they were is really pretty unlikely, so quite a lot of them will be, again, reproduction organ pipes. I've borrowed the YouTube demonstration of this organ, of the Brustwerk mostly, by an organist called Balint Covers.
I forgot to demonstrate the Brustwerk, so here it is. Start with the Gedacht. Unterlinie 4. With the Gedacht. Vault float 2. Regal 8. The Shaman 4. Then the Cymbal 2 without the reeds. Float 2.
So that really ends the exploration of the sounds that survive that Bach heard, or reproduction sounds that are very similar to those that he heard. Do be clear that these are by no means the only sounds that are preserved from the early 18th century, or even earlier than that. For instance, the Trost organs, Gottfried Heinrich Trost was the builder who built the organs in Waltershausen and Altenburg, and they are still there, but it is very doubtful that Bach actually played the organ at Waltershausen. The circumstances were just too unclear, and Altenburg has had Ladegast all over it and really is absolutely nothing like it was in Bach's day. If you want to find out more about Bach's organs, and indeed there are quite a lot of them which don't survive but which we know about, then a complete directory of Bach organs by Christoph Wolff and Markus Zepf has just been translated very well into English by Lynn Edwards Butler. A picture is on the screen. So thank you very much for watching this short presentation. I hope it's given you some idea of the magical sounds that did inspire Bach to write the wonderful music that he wrote. It's all been extremely serious, as of course German culture can be, but to end, therefore, I'm going to play you something completely different, and indeed we are going to enter the world of the Pythonesque here. As for a bit of light relief, we're going to hear some Bach played on an organ he very definitely did not hear. What on earth he would have made of this, I dread to think. Perhaps he'd have just dropped dead. I certainly wouldn't blame him. So cringe away to your heart's content as Robert Elmore plays the Schubert chorale on Recital, Sleeper's Wake, on that organ which I'm sure you are all going to recognise.